The governor takes a stand on a state fair ban. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It's the middle of summer. Candidates are starting to campaign here and there. You know, if we had a presidential big race in Illinois, we'd know more, but I guess that's all over the country. But kind of a quiet week in state government, but we're going to talk about it. Charlie Wheeler is back. He is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, University of Illinois Springfield, longtime Chicago Sun-Times reporter at the State House before that. Welcome back, Charlie.
It's always good to be here, Bernie.
And Brian Mackey is back, State House reporter for NPR Illinois. Welcome, Brian.
Good to be with you, Bernie.
Okay, I didn't mean to say it was terribly quiet because there's been one of those smaller but controversial issues that has occurred in the last week or so, as the Pritzker administration decided that Confederate Railroad, which was one of the bands that was going to play at the DuQuoin State Fair, which comes after the Illinois State Fair in Springfield, but is also run by the state, should not be in that lineup because their logo is an old steam engine with a couple of stars and bars known as Confederate flags flying, and therefore they get canceled. And this caused some controversy, and some people in Southern Illinois, particularly State Representative Terry Bryant, who met with people in the governor's office in Chicago early last week, said, well, gee, why are you doing that? You know, is this censorship? And what about Snoop Dogg playing at the state fair because he's a rapper who has had some negative political images, including an image that he posted of himself on Instagram over what looked like a body with a toe tag saying Trump, which I guess had been planned as an album cover, but there was a simpler album cover that ended up coming out on that record that said "Make America Crip Again," as after the Los Angeles gang, the Crips. And
Bernie, I never knew you were such a hip-hop scholar.
Snoop Dogg has explained that the Crips started like the Black Panthers started to helping people in the neighborhood when other people left them for nothing. Anyway, the governor said Confederacy was a terrible, horrible thing, and we stand by our decision to pull the ban. Any thoughts, Charlie Wheeler?
Well, I agree with what he did because I think the Confederate flag, despite all of this nostalgia about, the good old days down south, it was predicated on a bunch of people who were traitors, committed treason, left the Union, and it was all because they felt people looking like the three of us, white guys, were somehow inherently superior to folks who had a little more pigment in their skin, which is, in my mind, just a reprehensible notion. And yeah, we've tried to make it, these guys noble and all that. That's nonsense. And that attitude, that racist attitude, persisted well after the Civil War. It persisted all the way, basically until we had the Civil Rights Acts in the 60s. Yeah, so yeah, it's a symbol. To me, it would be on the same level as if I created a band and decided I'm going to call this band Mein Kampf, and we got swastikas for our.
Okay. Well, there were lots of. I understand you are as strong in your statements there as Governor Pritzker was, and yet up until recent years, and we've had some horrible things happen in certain states, including in a church in South Carolina where several black people got killed by a white young man, and then Confederate flags have come down. But up until recent years, there was just a pride in heritage and of the flag. And this band has been around, Brian, since the late 80s?
Late 80s, early 90s is when they started to become a national act. I mean, it is something that I think there's been an elevation of the national consciousness of this issue. Illinois did not really participate in the debates for Confederate monuments that we've had in the past few years, where people have been protesting and chaining themselves and scaling flagpoles to take down flags. But I think it is, if any state in the North has a claim to objection to Confederate iconography, it's the one that had its favorite son assassinated as a result of the war of treason, of this rebellion by Confederate states. So I understand that some people don't recognize the hurt that other people feel, particularly people of color or anyone who was offended by that treason back in the 1860s, feel about this, and they think of it in a different way. But the fact is, this is something where there has been a growing consensus. We have seen southern states removing some of this iconography. And I think that this certainly fits in also with Governor Pritzker's brand. He has been very careful and deliberate about appointing people of diverse backgrounds, racially, based on gender, orientation, all different things. And he is very proud and has repeatedly said that he put together the most diverse administration in the history of Illinois. So it's certainly something that I think fits in with the image he is projecting of himself as somebody who is very aware of these issues, which are increasingly important in Democratic politics in the last few years.
But was this handled well? I mean, it's his Department of Agriculture who approved this lineup. The lineup was out there. It might have been that Rich Miller on Capitol Facts posted something, hey, we've got a band called Confederate Railroad coming to one of our state fairs in Du Quoin, and then shortly thereafter, I don't know if that was a cause and effect, but then there was the ban, and then there was the reaction, and then there's some people talking about boycotting the fairs, and it's seeming to exacerbate some of the upstate, downstate tension. And again, Governor Pritzker has been very open about his feelings. Brian and Charlie, as you have said, he, for example, is very clear in saying he thinks President Trump is misogynistic and racist. He'll use the term like racist that a lot of even downstate Democrats might not use toward the president, but Governor Pritzker will. Is he dividing people in doing this, or is he teaching a lesson that's a good thing, or is he just setting an example that's right? I guess it depends how you look at it.
I suppose it's where you are, where you start from.
Yeah.
I think, in my mind, I think, as I said earlier, he's doing the right thing, and I would hope people would learn from it. And I don't think any heads are going to roll at the Department of Agriculture, because I'm sure it was not Governor Pritzker who sat and negotiated with these guys for their contract. It was somebody lower down on the food chain.
And they had apparently played at this fair before, maybe even many times before.
Yeah. But it's a mistake that won't be made again. And to me, there's a certain irony in people in Southern Illinois saying, well, we're going to show you, we're just going to boycott the fair. And I'm thinking, man, the Du Quoin State Fair, the reason it's a state fair, not just a Du Quoin fair, is because the state, 20 years ago, stepped in and bought it when it was under private ownership and was going to go belly up.
Was that Jim Thompson, I think?
Yeah.
I think Jim Thompson did that.
Once upon a time, it held the Hambletonian, probably the most renowned harness racing race in the country. That's not here anymore. It's, I think, in New York. But it was seen as an economic benefit to Southern Illinois. The folks who work at the fair, the merchants who sell their goods there, the guys who peddle the popcorn and the hot dogs and all that. And boycotting the fair doesn't do anything to hurt, those nasty liberals up in Chicago, but it does hurt the people in Southern Illinois. So I thought that was a very emotional, brainless response.
Yeah, well, I do think it's fair to say that even it's not all on a partisan divide, but some Republicans say we're not saying anything about we're idolizing what happened in the South in the past and the history of slavery. Tim Butler is a state representative from Springfield who his district includes the Illinois State Fairgrounds, and Terry Bryant, the representative from Murfreesboro, invited him along to the meeting at the governor's office in Chicago. And Butler was clear, I spoke to him about this, saying, I think the flag represents bad things. It does represent a racist past of America, but I'm worried about censorship over time, and he didn't think Snoop Dogg should be canceled, because he knows that some bands make their political statements as they go. So,
yeah, I just say, I mean, Confederate Railroad has now been booked to play in Southern Illinois. Apparently,
nearby,
a motorcycle dealership nearby managed to book the band.
And I think they've also encouraged people to go to the fair too, so the other bands get listeners, and the fair stays active, like Charlie said. And there's I think the idea of a boycott has been talked about, but I don't know if that's going to materialize or not. I don't think, maybe not.
Yeah, we hope.
Yeah,
not.
I mean, this is just part of the ongoing politics of today, right? As people's political identity increasingly, it becomes something that is more core to their being, and it becomes it's replaced religion for a lot of people, I think. And they sort of view themselves as Democrat or Republican, and that's so essential to who they are, and they really feel assaulted if you do anything that goes against that. And there are now TV networks that feed people, this constant diet.
And this is not one.
Well, yeah, we try not to be. But I think that these issues are only going to continue to proliferate. I mean, if you remember a few years ago, I think Governor Rauner, there was a photo where he was shaking the hand of a guy in a motorcycle vest, and some astute observers noticed that the guy had on the motorcycle vest a Confederate flag patch, and he took some heat for this. So this is something that it's going to continue to be an issue. It's something where I think people are just going to remain divided on this, although perhaps it's something that over time will change. I don't know. This is something that I don't think that there's going to be a meeting of the minds on this anytime soon.
And perhaps people can just enjoy the state fairs, both of them, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
So, turning to a different kind of state issue, Charlie, the Pritzker administration has been reported to be hiring hundreds of people to ease the Medicaid enrollment backlog. This is something left over apparently from the Rauner administration, and give us a little background on that.
Yeah, part of the problem is we've been trying for pretty long. I think our first effort went back to when Jim Edgar was governor 20-some years ago to move people on Medicaid, and now there are roughly 3 million Illinoisans who are covered by the state federal health care program that also covers nursing home costs for most of the seniors in Illinois. Move them away for fee-for-service, where I go to the doctor bills Medicaid, the state pays the doctor, to a system where my health would be managed by a managed care operation. So if I want to go to the doctor, I talk to them, and they say, well, yeah, you can go, or well, no, why don't you, take 2 aspirin and stay home, that kind of thing. And the incentive is that the theory is that if you have a managed care operation overlooking these healthcare decisions, they'll be more efficient, they'll be more economical. The flip side is managed care gets paid on a per capita basis. So they get paid, I don't know, let's say $100 a month for Charlie Wheeler, and if Charlie Wheeler doesn't go to the doctor, they pocket the $100. That's simplified, but that's sort of how it works. And the difficulty in moving people is that the state didn't have enough people to try and oversee the operation. And now that's why we're hiring hundreds of people to be involved in this. And we're also negotiating with the private firms that have been providing this intermediate level of care. And to me, an example of some of the goofiness that you get into is there had been a delay when a mom who was covered by Medicaid gave birth to a child. There was a delay before saying that, oh, the baby's qualified for Medicaid. And I'm thinking to myself, how can that be?
Because the paperwork didn't get pushed.
This newborn is independently wealthy? Come on.
Yeah. Well, it's an ongoing, we've had various kinds of talk with in-state government of understaffing, and, the Department of Children and Family Services certainly has been getting a fair amount of publicity. Channel 20 in Springfield has done a series of stories. Channel 9 in Chicago, WGN-TV recently did a big sit-down with the governor and talked about, how many children are under the state's watchful eye, but these horrible situations where kids have died and slipped through the cracks, and the governor has talked about we have to hire more caseworkers and spend more money, and also have the outside agencies funded because there was such a stress on them when there was no state budget for a few years in the past. So I don't know, it's just one of those ongoing stories that there's actual governing to be done by this new administration, in addition to all the politics and the bills that are passed.
Pathetic things is there are scores of kids who are being held in psychiatric facilities who don't need that level of care anymore because DCFS can't find anywhere to put them.
Right.
And so they're being, in a sense, unjustly imprisoned.
And that was a Channel 20 story where sometimes it's
months. Channel 20 has done a really heck of a job on this. Give credit where it's due.
Indeed. We also have another situation which is going to perhaps raise ire of some folks, but there's been a recent decision in a court. A judge ruled that pay freezes for legislators in the past, where they've the legislature has acted each year for several years to say, well, we're supposed to get an increase under the scheme of, or just the plan for how our income grows, but we're going to freeze pay and not take that increase this year. They just got a small increase this year at the end of the session, which caused a big uproar because they're going to make like $1,500 or $1,600 more per year per legislator. But that was supposed to be frozen, and then the House didn't freeze it, and then it just got through, and the governor said he'd sign the bill because it was part of the whole budget. But Mike Noland, who is a former legislator from Elgin, and James Claiborne joined the lawsuit. He's from down south, is it Belleville, I think, senator. They have this lawsuit, and a judge said that goes against the Constitution, that you can't reduce the pay of legislators. So this could have some consequences depending on how far it goes in court, where legislators end up getting bigger salaries than they have now, and just the way people react to those things, that could be a big issue.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is going to be much more of a controversy than some redneck band with their Confederate flag. And no offense to rednecks.
Please, Charlie.
Yeah. No, the Constitution is pretty clear, and I actually printed out copies of it. In Article 4 for the legislature, Section 11, it says, a member shall receive a salary and allowances as provided by law, but changes in the salary of a member shall not take effect during the term for which he has been elected. So, just looking at the English, what that says is, well, okay, that means they can't change their salary. While they're in office, they can maybe change it, and if they get reelected, then they can maybe get more or less. And the argument was that the legislative scheme, which provides automatic cost of living increases, can't be mitigated because of the Constitution if the lawmakers say, well, this year we're not going to follow the legislative scheme. We're not going to take it this year. And in the last several budget implementation bills, they've had that provision. The law says we get a cost of living. We're not going to do it this year. For fiscal 18, we're not going to take it. Fiscal 19, we're not going to take it. That legislation was not modified for fiscal 20, the fiscal year we're in now, so they're entitled to it. And at least at the circuit court level, the ruling is, yes, they get it, and they get back pay, and not only legislators, but also statewide elected officials like governors, secretaries of state, lieutenant governors, comptroller, attorney general, treasurer, because the same language is in the executive article saying that changes in the salary of these officers elected or appointed for stated terms shall not take effect during the stated terms.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, and Brian, I'll just toss it to you. Why do people care so much about what their legislators get paid? Because you hear more. I heard more right after the budget was passed, which is what, a $40 billion budget, about the $1,600 a year that legislators are going to get paid than a whole lot of other things. I guess it's an easy target, and people love to dislike their legislators.
They do, and there's been a concerted campaign to go after this issue on both sides of the aisle. I mean, just about anyone who's mounting a new campaign for office knows one of the easiest things you can do is create a mailer talking about all the taxpayer benefits your opponent has gathered over the years. They don't just say what his salary is, they say all the salary he's ever collected from any government job he's ever had.
$1 million person.
He's a millionaire so-and-so. Well, he's had a state job for 30 years. But, I mean, it's an easy target. But I think, Charlie raises a good point about the language in the Constitution being pretty clear, and we already have a precedent where the Illinois Supreme Court said similar language in the judicial article, which is they held, which says they cannot diminish the judge's salary during their time in office. They held that meant the judges were entitled to cost of living increases every single year. So by that logic, if they extend that logic from a case about 15 years ago to the legislators, then it seems like they have a pretty solid case moving forward. Of course, things can change, and the judges are not immune to the political winds, despite what they say, especially in cases like this.
Well, the argument that was made against the lawsuit brought by Noland and Claiborne was that, well, the intent of the framers when they wrote this into the Constitution was to stop lawmakers from giving themselves pay raises, but you could go ahead and decrease your pay without any complication. But in the opinion, the circuit judge, and I forget the individual's name now, but had like 3 or 4 definitions of what does change mean. Well, here's what Webster says, here's what Merriam says. And change means to alter.
Right. Well, and I believe when Pat Quinn tried to withhold legislator pay, if they didn't pass a budget when he was governor for a while, there was, as I recall, a court ruling saying you can't do that. That's diminishing. That's changing pay during the session, and you cannot hold that over the head of a legislator.
And part of that too was
to say, we're going to use this as leverage for your vote.
The executive branch intruding on the legislative branch in a proper manner. But in this particular case, that's not really. What would you say? It's not relevant in that this is a legislature doing it to itself.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And if I could just add here, and Charlie, you could speak to this better than I could, but I'm a reporter. I've also been a columnist in the past, and back when I had that columnist hat, I wrote an article about why it might not be such a terrible idea to pay legislators a decent salary, even though it's politically unpopular. Because if you don't, you end up with a legislature not of citizens but of retirees, because they can afford it. You end up with a legislature of real estate brokers, lawyers, people who can take time off, and you don't have people who can afford to quit their job as a plumber or electrician or journalist or whatever else it would be in the sort of more average realm of salaries. And so you end up with a more elite legislature who come from these specific type of professions that either let you take a lot of time off or have let you build up a lot of money over the years, or both. And people complain about Speaker Madigan being a wealthy attorney and Senate President Cullerton being a wealthy attorney and so many of these other people being high-power attorneys. Well, if you want a legislature that's more diverse in personnel, it helps to pay people what they're worth. And I think that, and this is what you can speak to, Charlie, I think one of the things I've read that Speaker Madigan is most proud of, or at least was earlier in his career as a legislator, was helping to professionalize the legislature by giving them more office staff, dedicated office space in the Capitol building, so that people felt this was more of a full-time job for them. So I know it stings, and we're paying more at the gas pump to think that these guys are just in it for themselves, but there is a public policy argument for increasing the compensation, hopefully drawing a better caliber of person to these jobs.
And it is still considered, many legislators are full-time, but many also have other jobs, and many are, lawyers on the side too, including, of course, leaders in the General Assembly, at least 3 of them. Yeah. And so they have, other businesses. And the base salary is it's now up around $70,000 with
something like,
but they all get stipends because of their other opportunities. Well, speaking of legislators, there will possibly be some turnover in the next year. We will find out, because there's some people talking about running for Congress. Sue Rezin is a state senator from Morris, although she's in the middle of a 4-year term, I believe. But she can run against Lauren Underwood, who's a U.S. representative in the 14th Congressional District, who beat Randy Hultgren last time and was one of the Democrats who flipped a seat from Republican to Democrat in 2018. But also showing interest in the 14th is State Senator Jim Oberweis, a guy named James Marta, who has run statewide before. Alan Skillicorn is a state representative. I think he would be happy if I said he's a very conservative person. All looking at this 14th, they might run. There's in Southern Illinois and Eastern Illinois, Senator Dale Ryder has said he's not running again. There's a freshman state representative, Darren Bailey, who says he's running for Ryder's seat. There is a Pastor Corey Musgrave who gave a very strong prayer with pro-life, anti-abortion messaging in it when he opened the session for the House one day. Apparently is running for Bailey's seat, so we're seeing some mix there. Margot McDermott of Mokina is a Republican state representative who says she's not running again. And there's an interesting case up where Lou Lang stepped down from leadership in the Illinois House last year. He's been doing some lobbying, but his replacement was a rabbi named, I believe it's Mark Kalish of Skokie, who said when he was appointed that he would vote for the Reproductive Health Act, which is the very pro-choice abortion bill that the legislature passed this year, but ended up voting present on it. And now, up there, he's got a problem.
He does. I mean, Representative Lang was prided himself on being a sort of pro-abortions rights legislator. I think this issue was very personal to him, and so he took the assurances of now Representative Kalish very seriously. Apparently, Kalish was whipping votes, helping to gin up votes for this at times controversial legislation. But ultimately, he decided, I guess there was some pressure on him, some sort of theologically motivated, you might say, that he could not vote for it, and he ultimately decided to vote present, which is where you don't vote yes or no. You can have an alternate button that just shows you were there but didn't want to take a stand on the bill.
Yeah, and on the big board, ironically enough, it lights up yellow when you vote president.
Just coincidence,
well, we know that because
I'm
everybody
sure.
said Barack Obama took a lot of president votes when he was there.
And in reality, in a vote like that, president is as good as no, because you have to have, in the House, you have to have 60 green lights. Right. And so red and yellow, in terms of impact on the bill, they're the same.
Yeah, so I don't imagine this is not a district that they're probably fearful of losing.
No, but there's a lot of pro-choice activism in that area. So now that I think Lou Lang is still one of the people who will,
he still has
is a leader of
committeeman job or something.
Right,
like
a leader of the Democratic Party there. So he, there's a chance that local folks are going to go for somebody else, and there might be a primary there, even if Representative.
Well, I guess there will
stays.
be a primary.
Yeah. It looks like.
It seems like one of those things where, he's a representative who people are probably with him on 98, 99% of the things, but in a safe district like that, you can, I guess, feel you can afford to go after somebody because you want them with you on everything.
Well, it's one of those tough issues,
that's an issue.
I have to finish up.
Okay.
I have to finish up.
No, I was just going to say that's an issue that for many people is the issue.
Sure. Correct, and this is an example of that. Charlie Wheeler, Brian Mackey, thanks for your thoughts. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.